This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode and share it with your friends. Last time, I mentioned the Washington Post reporting FEMA's backlog of 19 emergency requests from governors around the country who, they all suffered billions this year in damages from tornadoes and forest fires. They have yet to get any response from Donald Trump and his FEMA. The Post said even at the height of last year's Hurricane Helene, FEMA's backlog didn't come close to what we're experiencing now. There are currently 1.1 million aid applications from American citizens, all suffering from devastating forest fires, tornadoes, and flooding. And the Post says it is now the worst logjam since President Jimmy Carter established FEMA nearly 50 years ago. But you remember before the election last year how Trump politicized Hurricane Helene? He lied, created panic, telling voters Biden was leaving them to die. That didn't happen. Didn't happen during Hurricane Helene. You know when it happened? In Puerto Rico in 2017, when Trump left the entire island of Puerto Rico to die after Hurricane Maria. Remember that? 2017, most of the island lost power for at least a year, with more than 3,000 Puerto Ricans dying. It was as bad, if not worse, than Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when another Republican president, George W. Bush, left people of color to die. Trump didn't care about Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is a colony. Yes, they're citizens, but they don't get to vote for president, so he left Puerto Rico to die, and he ordered FEMA to focus on Houston, which had just been hit by Hurricane Harvey. It was doing perfectly okay, but see, Houston, Texas votes. Puerto Rico doesn't, so FEMA, on Trump's orders, stayed in Houston, and FEMA left Puerto Rico to die. Well, hurricane season started 2 days ago, and it lasts until November. They're expecting 10 very nasty hurricanes. Some meteorologists saying it could be one of the worst hurricane seasons on record. But don't worry. Trump just put David Richardson in charge of FEMA. Just last month, put David Richardson in. In a speech to FEMA workers on his first day heading FEMA last month, Richardson said, quote, "Don't get in my way because I will run right over you. I will achieve President Trump's intent because I and I alone in FEMA speak for FEMA," unquote. I love that talk, right? That's how you know somebody's going to get something done. He says things like, "Get in my way, I'll run over you." This is who we need, more angry white men in charge of the bureaucracy. Well, according to Reuters, during a FEMA staff meeting on Monday, David Richardson said he was surprised to learn that there is such a thing as hurricane season. The new head of FEMA just said he had no idea that there's such a thing as hurricane season. Apparently, when he said, "I will run over you," he meant while backing out of his parking spot. Richardson was picked to head FEMA despite his only experience dealing with disasters has been his last 3 weeks working for the Trump administration. According to Reuters, Trump wants to eliminate FEMA, and he wants the states to take care of their own emergencies. That's why he's laid off 1/3 of the FEMA staff. FEMA has canceled most of its hurricane preparedness workshops. They're no longer training states to deal with hurricanes. They are being replaced instead with black Sharpies, so that when Trump says Hurricane Dorian is hitting Alabama, but it isn't, you just Sharpie it in. Remember that? Sharpiegate, 2019? Trump said Hurricane Dorian was hitting Alabama, And then the National Weather Service in Alabama had the effrontery to say, no, it's not hitting Alabama. And it didn't hit Alabama. So what did Trump do? He lied. Look at this. He Sharpied in. See that over there? He Sharpied in parts of Alabama to make it look like, well, I was told that the Hurricane Dorian was going to hit He's never wrong. He's never wrong. It's so unfair. Well, Michael Lowry worked for the National Hurricane Center as well as FEMA, and he writes in the New York Times Sunday that DOJA cuts this year have done irreparable damage to the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, slashing some offices by as much as 60%, grounding weather balloons and hurricane hunters, and thereby endangering the lives of hundreds of millions of Americans because our government can't predict the timing and severity of incoming storms and tornadoes. So what's going to happen this hurricane season? Well, hopefully it'll be a mild one. They're saying it won't be, but if it's devastating, Republicans will lie. The same way Trump lied after Hurricane Helene last year, saying Biden left people to die. Well, after the next deadly hurricane, Trump will lie, saying, I didn't leave anyone to die. And who do you think Republicans are going to believe? Trump or grandma screaming into the phone that it's been 2 weeks, still no food, so I ate the dog? Just lie. That's what Republicans do. They're liars. Rolling Stone magazine out with a story entitled, Republicans are flat out lying about their Medicaid cuts. The Senate this week takes up the 2026 budget bill passed in the House, which cuts $1 trillion from Medicaid and food stamps, with the Center on Budget Policy Priorities predicting the bill will result in 15 million Americans over the next 10 years becoming uninsured. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office puts it at 14 million. 14 million people are going to lose their health insurance over the next 10 years if this Republican bill gets passed. So what do? You lie. You lie. Russell Vought, Trump's director of Office of Management and Budget, telling CNN that all these complaints about the massive Medicaid cuts, they're quote unquote astroturf. That means, fake grass. Well, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, isn't astroturf, and they say 14 million Americans are going to lose their health insurance if this bill gets passed. But he told CNN, quote, no one's losing coverage because of this bill. This bill, he said, will, quote, preserve and protect our social safety net. As Rolling Stone magazine writes, that's a lie. He's cutting $600 billion from Medicaid. Medicaid chief, Dr. Oz, he's in charge of Medicaid. On Sunday, Dr. Oz said, quote, we're not cutting Medicaid. We're future-proofing it, unquote. Yes, Dr. Oz, the head of Medicaid, is future-proofing it with thiamine supplementation and ivermectin. They're going to future-proof Medicaid with hydrochloroquine. Dr. Oz is in charge of Medicaid. Maybe it's safer if we did just eliminate Medicaid. Maybe it's safer. Mike Johnson, the liar, telling Sunday's Meet the Press that Medicaid work requirements don't mean 4.8 million Americans will lose their insurance, which the Congressional Budget Office said work requirements for Medicaid will throw 4.8 million Americans off insurance. So Johnson just lies. And he said, no, it just means 4.8 million Americans might have to fill out some extra paperwork. Sure, that's what he said. It's just extra paperwork. The New York Times with an article entitled, Trump and Allies Sell Domestic Policy Bill with Falsehoods. In other words, they're liars. For example, the Times reports White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, liar, said the budget bill is, quote, the largest deficit reduction in nearly 30 years with $1.6 trillion in mandatory savings, unquote. That is a lie. I don't care how big the cross is around your neck. You're bearing false witness. You're a liar. The Times points out even Republican Senator Rand Paul says this budget would add close to $4 trillion to our debt. That's why they're asking to lift the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, Caroline Leavitt, you liar. If they were saving $1.5 trillion, then why would the debt ceiling have to be lifted by $5 trillion, you liar? Mike Johnson lying that the budget bill, cracks down on illegal aliens who are gaming the system. Sure. He said 1.4 million people will lose health insurance, but don't worry, they're illegal aliens. Which is there's no such thing as an illegal alien. They're not illegal. The Times reports 1.4 million undocumented immigrants are not collecting Medicaid because except for very rare emergencies, they're not eligible for Medicaid. During a town hall last week, Republican Senator from Iowa, Joanie Ernst, told the same lie about 1.4 million Americans getting thrown off Medicaid because they're gaming the system. And don't worry, they're not really Americans. She said they're illegal aliens. But, people in Iowa are kind-hearted. And one of them shouted, who cares if they're in this country legally or illegally? People will die. To which Republican Senator Joanie Ernst said, well, we're all going to die. And that statement died. The audience was appalled. Appalled. People booed. They were shocked. So Joanie Ernst, over the weekend, tried to spin it, and she filmed herself, I'm not making this up, walking through a cemetery, reminding people, we're all going to die. That's what she did, laughing it off, trying to make light of her callous, hateful, and bigoted disregard for migrants. As though if they're migrants, they don't deserve Medicaid. Well, they don't get Medicaid. They pay into Medicare, they pay into Social Security. Unless they become citizens, they don't qualify for it. They're cutting Medicaid. People are going to die. People are going to die. Politico, and that's the plan, Politico reporting that while some Senate Republicans oppose the House budget bill because it adds to the deficit and they want more cuts, there are other Senate Republicans. Politico refers to them as the Medicaid moderates who see no political expediency to cutting Medicaid. Politico says the Medicaid moderates are Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, who calls the new mandatory co-payments for Medicaid, quote unquote, a sick tax. There's also Lisa Murkowski, Republican senator from Alaska, Republican senator from Maine, Susan Collins, Republican senator from Kansas, Jerry Moran, and from West Virginia, Jim Justice. He's a Medicaid moderate. Rand Paul saying right now he doesn't think 10 Republican senators would vote for this budget bill as it is right now. So with J.D. Vance, our vice president, casting the tying vote in the Senate, all it takes is about 4 Republican senators to say no. Call your senator, not your congressperson, your senator. Call your senator. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And if you want to help me out, please share it on social media or with your friends. Leave a comment. On April 10th of this year, during an Oval Office visit from the president of Ukraine, Donald Trump screamed at Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, telling him, surrender to Putin. You don't hold the cards. You're losing. So give Putin what he wants. You cannot win this because Russia is too strong. Over the weekend, Ukraine launching Operation Spiderweb, a surprise attack with 117 drones hitting air bases deep inside Russia, as far as eastern Siberia and even the Arctic Circle, causing $7 billion in damages and severely crippling the Russian Air Force's ability to launch long-range missile attacks. Some now calling it Putin's Pearl Harbor. Zelensky saying it's one for the history books. Russia acknowledging the attacks, but says nobody was hurt. According to Zelensky, Operation Spiderweb was 18 months in the planning, and Donald Trump was left completely out of the loop. Really? You don't think he could have kept it secret? What made the attack so remarkable was the Ukrainian army's ability to sneak drones into Russia on flatbed trucks and then launch them from deep inside enemy territory. Last week, the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, announced he, the EU, Great Britain, and the United States have all lifted restrictions on how Ukraine uses weapons given to it by the West. In the past, especially under Joe Biden, the West was reluctant to see their weapons landing deep inside Russia, and the West restricted the use of those weapons. They narrowed it down to just defensive measures, or if it's right over the border. You could launch these missiles right over the border. But now, as Putin escalates with 50,000 soldiers amassing along the Ukrainian border, preparing for what many believe to be his summer land invasion, and with Donald Trump washing his hands of the entire thing, European leaders are telling Zelensky, go for it. Russia responded to the June 1st attack, Operation Spiderweb, by launching its largest air assault since the Ukrainian invasion began in 2022. 472 Russian drones on Sunday aimed at Ukrainian civilians. Also, on Monday, 3 Ukrainians killed, 19 injured after Russian troops fired on Kherson in southern Ukraine. 5 Ukrainians killed and 5 injured yesterday in separate fighting. But Ukraine continued to reach into Russia with hundreds of more drones hitting Russian-occupied Crimea and 7 other regions inside the Russian mainland. All this in the lead-up to Monday's resumption of peace talks in Istanbul, Turkey, between Russian and Ukrainian peace representatives. Monday's talks resulted in another exchange of prisoners, similar to a swap the two sides agreed to when they met back in May. After Monday's peace conference, it became apparent Ukraine wants a permanent ceasefire, while Russia wants it to just be a temporary one. During Monday's peace talks, Russia put into writing specifically what it wants to secure a permanent truce. Russia wrote in its peace memorandum that Ukraine must leave eastern Ukraine, specifically the 4 territories Putin officially announced he was annexing back in September of 2022. Russia wants Ukraine to recognize Russian as Ukraine's official language alongside and equal to the Ukrainian language. Russia wants Ukraine to promise never to join NATO. This, despite joining NATO, written into the Ukrainian constitution in early 2019 before Zelensky was elected president. And in September of 2022, right around the time Putin declared he was annexing parts of eastern Ukraine, the Ukrainian government officially applied for acceptance into NATO. Russia also demanding Ukraine immediately stop accepting weapons from the West. Talks expected to resume in late June as Ukraine said it will review Russia's peace memorandum. Tayyip Erdogan, president of Turkey, who's hosting the peace talks, called them magnificent Monday, adding he hopes the next meeting will include Vladimir Putin, Zelensky, and Donald Trump. Well, Putin may not necessarily be aching for peace despite the mass casualties. Since this invasion, Russia has been transformed into a wartime economy with nearly 40% of its annual budget going towards weapons, as well as other material needed to keep its army on the march. That comes to $115 billion being spent on defense each year in Russia. And while that's causing inflation in Russia is now at 10%, it's very high, it's also created 1.5 million new jobs, but not good jobs. That's the problem with a war economy. War economies have their limitations. So while 1.5 million new jobs have been created, you got your 10% inflation, and other sectors of the economy are being neglected. Russia's middle class right now is shrinking. But Putin is a despot, and the Wall Street Journal reporting that he is reluctant to turn off the military-industrial complex for fear of demobilizing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, bringing them home. To what? To hyperinflation. And if the war is over, no jobs, hyperinflation, and an economy switching off the military-industrial complex. He believes demobilization, hundreds of thousands of soldiers with nothing to do, is a recipe for trouble. According to this article in the Wall Street Journal, Stalin, after World War II, feared his returning soldiers. He feared them. He was afraid they would rise up against them because they didn't have enough work. So he shipped a lot of them off to the gulags. It's also worth remembering that there are some who believe the Soviet Union collapsed thanks to its defeat in Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires, including ours. 620,000 Soviet soldiers fought in Afghanistan. By 1989, they had all come home. And within 2 years, the Soviet Union collapsed, demobilizing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of trained killers is very threatening to the people demobilizing them. It's why, after World War II, Great Britain, under Clement Attlee, gave everyone free health care and a much stronger safety net. Here in the United States, right after World War II, returning white soldiers got the GI Bill. White soldiers found it easier to get a free college education. White soldiers returning found it very easy to buy a home. And the government poured money into the economy, creating inflation, but they wanted to make sure there were plenty of jobs for white veterans because they knew these guys defeated Hitler, taking on Truman. Well, that would have been a pushover. I mean, my father came home from World War II. He was a trained killer. He was. Sweet man. But you better give him a job. You better give him a job. So Putin is afraid of his soldiers. You might remember the head of the Wagner Group, Putin's private army of mercenaries. Remember the head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin? Putin killed him on August 23rd, 2023, after Prigozhin staged a coup against the Russian leader. So Putin has every reason to keep this war going. And there are some countries, neighboring Russia, who are worried that should the fighting stop in Ukraine, it might start up someplace else, because that's what military-based economies tend to do. This is the mop-up for June 3rd? Where is it? June? Well, I don't know. It's June. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. And the best way, please, to help is share this episode with your friends. Do it through social media, please. And leave a comment. I read all your comments. If I said anything you disagree with, let me know. If I made a factual error, let me know. If I make a mistake, I pin the comment. You can find out in the comments section. I'll pin the comment when I've made a mistake. And I issue corrections. I'm rarely wrong, factually. My opinions are wrong sometimes, but I get my facts pretty right. Like the Taliban did not attack us on 9/11. Okay? Stuff like that. I'm usually right. Well, the FBI arrested Mohammed Sabri Solomon on Sunday, charging him with a hate crime after 8 Boulder, Colorado protesters marching in solidarity with hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza were injured by Molotov cocktails allegedly thrown by the suspect while he reportedly screamed, "Free Palestine." The FBI says the suspect had prepared 14 more Molotov cocktails that he had planned to throw before he was apprehended. Despite nobody getting killed, the FBI charged Solomon with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Thank you, Kash Patel. Homeland Security saying the suspect is an Egyptian national whose visa expired more than 2 years ago. The New York Times reporting that a spokesperson for Boulder, Colorado Community Health saying some of the 8 victims, 4 women, 4 men, were released from the local hospital while others have been transferred, but their whereabouts being kept secret for security reason. This attack coming after that shooting inside Washington, D.C.'s Jewish Museum on May 21st, leaving 2 dead. The man taken into custody after that shooting was reportedly screaming, "Free Palestine." In April of this year, the Pennsylvania governor's mansion, now home to Jewish Governor Josh Shapiro, was set fire by a man later arrested claiming he did it in support of Palestine. Talks between Hamas and Israel continue but remain stalled. Israel wants the remaining hostages released in exchange for a 60-day ceasefire, while Hamas says the hostages can only be released if Israel agrees to a permanent ceasefire and pulls out of Gaza, allowing humanitarian aid to enter. This stalemate persists partly because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to eliminate Hamas entirely, something experts say he's unlikely going to be able to do, even though more than 55,000 Palestinians have died in Gaza since fighting began back in October of 2023. Former Biden State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller telling Sky News on Monday that Israel, quote, without a doubt is committing war crimes in Gaza. Miller saying Israel is not committing genocide and that it's an open question as to whether Israel's official policy is to commit these war crimes. But Miller said there are individual instances of behavior on the part of individual Israeli soldiers. Those instances, he said, qualify as war crimes. Didn't say it while he was Biden's State Department spokesperson, saying it now. Megha Vemuri, MIT's 2025 class president, was forbidden from participating in Friday's graduation ceremonies after she gave a speech the day before criticizing Israel's war in Gaza. In her speech, she sported a keffiyeh atop her robe, and Vemuri lashed out at MIT for doing business with Israel, and she praised her fellow graduates for protesting the war in Gaza. MIT accused her of misleading them, not telling university officials that she was going to politicize her speech. And so the next day she was allowed to receive her degree, but was banned from the entire university. She wasn't allowed on the campus during commencement exercises. Vermeury later said, quote, "No need for me to walk across the stage of an institution that is complicit in this genocide," unquote. Senator John McCain's widow, Cindy McCain, heads the United Nations World Food Program. She's a Biden appointee. Cindy McCain now warning the situation in Gaza is about to become a humanitarian crisis unlike the world has ever seen. Al Jazeera reporting that in the past 24 hours, 51 Palestinians have been killed with more than 500 injured as Israel ramps up its ground invasion. Doctors Without Borders saying Israeli soldiers opened fire, killing dozens of Palestinians lining up for food distributed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in the southern town of Rafah. CBS News reports 50 Palestinians lining up for humanitarian assistance were killed in central Gaza on Sunday by what Palestinians claim to be an Israeli airstrike. The Israeli government denies they were behind the killings. Ehud Olmert served as Prime Minister of Israel from April of 2006 to March of 2009. At one time, he was a member of Likud, which the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, leads. Now, in a new opinion piece entitled "Enough is Enough, Israel is Committing War Crimes," he wrote it for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert accuses Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet of being, quote, "a bunch of thugs committing war crimes." Olmert accusing the Netanyahu government of planning to wipe out the entire Palestinian population in Gaza through mass starvation. This, as the Israeli Prime Minister talks openly of permanently removing the 2.5 million Palestinians living in Gaza, removing them from their homes, either placing them in southern Gaza permanently or forcing them to leave Gaza altogether. Back in May, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu literally said Palestinians living in northern and central Gaza have to be relocated to southern Gaza in order to keep them safe. Where have I heard that before? We have to relocate the Palestinians from northern and central Gaza and place them in southern Gaza in order to keep them safe. I don't remember where I heard that before. Netanyahu denies he intends to remove the entire population of Palestinians from Gaza. But this year, Donald Trump repeatedly calls for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. He said it during a visit. Benjamin Netanyahu was visiting this year. Trump repeatedly, during the visit, during a press conference, called for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. He said, move them all out and replace them with luxury resorts that rival the Riviera, unquote. That's what Trump keeps saying. Meanwhile, Netanyahu insisting it's not Israel's official policy to remove all the Palestinians living in Gaza. It is, however, the official policy of his national security minister, Gvir, who has repeatedly called for the relocation of Gaza's entire population. He occasionally couches it with terms like voluntary emigration or relocation or encouragement of departure. Well, where would they go? Despite Egypt insisting it won't accept that the Palestinians, these hard-right Israelis and Donald Trump saying the Palestinians should be moved into Egypt's Sinai Desert. Donald Trump suggesting Jordan would be a good place to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Send them to Jordan, he said. This is ethnic cleansing. It is a war crime. It is a war crime. And our president is openly suggesting repeatedly that Benjamin Netanyahu should ethnically cleanse Gaza of 2.5 million Palestinians and turn it into the Riviera. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu insisting the war in Gaza will not end until Hamas is finally eliminated, which is why negotiations with Hamas accomplishes so little. Foreign Affairs magazine this month has a piece outlining why Netanyahu probably is going to fail at eliminating Hamas. No matter how many Palestinians he kills in Gaza, Foreign Affairs saying he's not going to eliminate Hamas. One chief reason, this is according to Foreign Affairs, one chief reason, according to Foreign Affairs, that Netanyahu is not going to be able to eliminate Hamas is Hamas remains popular in Gaza. Despite 55,000 Palestinians killed by Israeli soldiers in response to Hamas's October 7th, 2023 invasion of Israel, despite all those people dying and all the starvation and dehydration and lack of medical care, Hamas remains popular in Gaza. According to the latest polling, the people of Gaza are not blaming Hamas for the humanitarian disaster that has befallen them in Gaza. They're not saying if only Hamas didn't attack Israel, this wouldn't be happening. Some of them are, but the majority aren't saying that. Also, Foreign Affairs writing that sometimes you can eliminate a terrorist group or an army by decapitating its leadership. But Foreign Affairs says it's not working with Hamas. They say it's not going to work with Hamas because Israel has been killing Hamas leaders for decades, and their bench is deep. Their bench is deep. They replace their leaders, especially since many of Hamas's leaders live in places other than Gaza. So, how strong is Hamas after all this killing? And how safe is Israel? Here's some uncomfortable truths to consider because right now this looks insoluble. So here's some facts. I looked into this. I've been asking, well, if you're going to kill 55,000, commit war crimes, starve these people, they are ethnically cleansing right now parts of Gaza. There's talk of just removing all the Palestinians from Gaza. How safe is Israel? Is Hamas still firing rockets into Israel? Because a lot of people say if Hamas would just stop firing rockets into Israel, this would stop. So the answer right now seems to be no. Hamas has stopped firing rockets into Gaza. So I'm going to give you some facts here, and you make your own call as to how you think this is going to play out. And the fighting inside Gaza, for the time being, seems to have eliminated Hamas's ability to fire rockets into Israel. This was the big problem. Israeli soldiers are being killed by Hamas rocket attacks inside Gaza. But the only missiles coming into Israel on a daily basis are from Yemen. So I'm going to give you some numbers. You might want to write these down. It is estimated that from October 7th, 2023, that's when Hamas invaded Israel, until the end of 2024, between that period, Hamas launched 10,100 rockets from Gaza into Israel. But in 2025, comparatively speaking, the rocket fire has been virtually non-existent. There's been some. I'm going to go over the numbers. Practically all of the missiles that have been launched into Israel this year are coming from Yemen. So, we're all angry. We're all angry. If you're Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, if you're an Israeli, how do you think the war is going? Last year, missiles were coming in from Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, and more than 10,000 from Gaza. This year, not so much. Objectively speaking, what are people thinking? What is Hamas thinking? What is Benjamin Netanyahu thinking? How is the war going in Benjamin Netanyahu's mind? Is Hezbollah still attacking Israel? Is Iran still attacking Israel? Is Hamas launching missiles into Israel in 2025? Very few. According to the American-Israeli Cooperative Enterprise, the last time Hamas attacked Israel was on May 21st of this year when it fired 3 rockets at Israel, but those missiles didn't make it out of Gaza. They landed inside Gaza. Israel says, well, I won't say what they said about that. On April 12th, 4 rockets fired out of Gaza this year, but they were intercepted by Israel's missile defense system. April 6th, an Israeli was injured after Hamas fired 10 rockets over the border. So clearly, in the past 6 weeks, fewer rockets are being launched into Israel by Hamas. On October 7th, 2023, when Hamas invaded, they launched 6,000 rockets into Israel. I won't go over the rest of the numbers. So if you're Benjamin Netanyahu, what are you thinking? If you're Hamas, what are you thinking? So America's official policy is a 2-state solution that doesn't include Hamas running Gaza. It was generally assumed Israel's endgame was eliminate Hamas and bring in the Palestinian Authority that's currently running the West Bank. These are called moderate Palestinians who can trace their politics to Yasser Arafat, who negotiated with Israel. The idea was eliminate Hamas, bring in the Palestinian Authority that runs the West Bank, and have them run Gaza. But that's not going to happen. Gaza voted about 20 years ago for Hamas, not Fatah, which is running the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And there was a little civil war between Fatah and Hamas over control of Gaza. Gaza rejected Fatah. So I don't see how you bring in the current Palestinian Authority running the West Bank to run Gaza, especially since Netanyahu is going to sabotage Fatah the same way Netanyahu was giving money to Hamas to sabotage Fatah, right? Divide and conquer. Well, as I said earlier, Hamas reportedly still popular in Gaza, despite it stealing humanitarian aid and then selling it on the black market, despite spending money on weapons instead of infrastructure, the polling shows the people of Gaza still support Hamas, and they believe until Israel is kicked out of Gaza and they finally have their own nation, they cannot govern. What do you think? What do you think? The United Nations has 87,000 peacekeepers, the blue helmets. Some are in Syria, some are in Lebanon, none in Gaza. So I don't know if UN peacekeepers could be sent into Gaza. I don't know. Had Putin not invaded Ukraine, maybe NATO could have been sent into Gaza as peacekeepers. There is the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and they signed Jared Kushner. Excuse me, I just spat up. They signed the Abraham Accords with Israel back in 2020 and normalized relations. That's thanks to Jared Kushner. The Abraham Accords, now, thanks to the Abraham Accords, Israel now has official diplomatic relations with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. And that is one of the reasons Hamas launched its attack in October of 2023. Saudi Arabia and Israel, because of the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia didn't sign the Abraham Accords, but Saudi Arabia and Israel were on the brink of establishing official diplomatic relations back in 2023. They have de facto diplomatic relations. They communicate through back channels because Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni nation, they are natural allies of Iran, which is a Shiite nation. Saudi Arabia and Iran, the geopolitics is they're fighting for control of its Sunni versus Shiite. That's not the only reason, but Israel has become a natural ally of Saudi Arabia. And that is why many believe Hamas launched its attack on Israel in 2023. They feared that once Israel and Saudi Arabia became allies, the plight of the Palestinians would be put on the back burner. And Iran didn't want Saudi Arabia to establish diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. Iran doesn't want Israel and Saudi Arabia to establish diplomatic relations. So Saudi Arabia is unofficially done worrying about the Palestinians. It is generally believed Osama bin Laden got much of his funding for 9/11 from Saudi princes because at that time, Saudi Crown Prince Abdullah was upset by how America and Israel failed to respond to the Second Intifada, which began a year before 9/11. Bill Clinton tried, in his last months in office, tried to negotiate peace between Israel and the Palestinians. It failed. The Second Intifada took place, and Saudi Arabia was furious with America and Israel. So, Saudi Arabia wasn't officially behind 9/11, but 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. We know the financing came from Saudi Arabia. At the time, Saudi Arabia's official foreign policy was, we want a nation state for the Palestinian people. But by the time Biden took office, more than 20 years later, Saudi Arabia had a new leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. He's good with a bone saw. MBS, according to Bob Woodward, has said that publicly, I must support the Palestinians, but privately, unlike the Saudi leaders before me, the plight of the Palestinians is not my concern, and I will not permit them to be an obstacle to modernization in the region. And modernization, he says, includes embracing Israel. It's a different Saudi Arabia than it was in the lead up to 9/11. This Saudi Arabia no longer funds Hamas. It funds the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, the moderates, but it's washed its hands of Hamas. That's why Saudi Arabia's natural enemy in the region, Iran, is now funding Hamas to the tune of roughly $100 million a year. Iran says we didn't finance or plan the attack on October 7th. But one of the reasons for that attack on October 7th, 2023, was to stop Saudi Arabia from normalizing relations with Israel, which Saudi Arabia cannot do right now because look what's going on in Gaza. The Arab street, as they say, would rise up. So that benefits Iran, and it benefits the leaders of Hamas. That was the plan. So, what do you do? What do you do? Anger is good. Hatred is good. Bigotry is good. Dehumanizing people is always good. Or not caring. You can stop paying attention. The UAE, which thanks to the Abraham Accords, recently offered to lead a peacekeeping mission inside Gaza, and it would be made up of Middle Eastern soldiers. Nothing has come from that offer. Probably because Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, would entrust foreign soldiers, especially Middle Eastern ones, stationed inside Gaza. There is mass starvation in Gaza. It is a humanitarian nightmare. Israel gets on average about $4 billion a year from the United States. Last year, thanks to that emergency supplemental, we gave Israel an additional $14 billion. $14 billion is a little less than half of Israel's entire annual defense budget that we know of. So Biden and now Trump, they have a lot of say into how Israel behaves in Gaza. $4 billion a year, a lot of money. $14 billion last year, a lot of money. Not sure what the answer is, but I know this guy, Benjamin Netanyahu, he doesn't have it. And I'm pretty sure he's the problem, or at least one of the problems. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I hope I gave you some facts. I hope they were objective facts and they help you figure this out. Because Trump and Netanyahu ain't going to do it. And you know what's going on in Gaza right now. Please like this episode because it's been so entertaining. Please share it. Please leave a comment. Please, whatever. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. And I'm going to try to do more shows this week. I'm going to try to do more shows and shorter shows. Thank you for listening to me. Did I cover everything? I think so, yeah.